Kia ora and welcome to episode number 13 of the New Zealand Small Business and Entrepreneur Festival podcast. My name is Craig Murray and today we've got a special guest, Flavio Hangatar, and today we are going to focus our conversation on bootstrapping. So if you don't know what bootstrapping a business is, you definitely will after this podcast and the reasons why bootstrapping may be the option that you need to think about to start your next business. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Flavio into the stream. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Good day, Craig.
How you go, man?
Yeah, very good. Thank you for having me. And episode 13, it's a good number.
Episode 13, it's lucky for me. So like all podcasts, I always do the podcast based here in Rotorua, middle of the North Island in New Zealand. Whereabouts are you?
I'm also in New Zealand and I'm in beautiful Auckland.
Auckland, coming out of lockdown, rolling into summer. It's going to be good. We're recording this on the beginning of our summer in New Zealand, December the 2nd, and we're leading up into Christmas. It's going to be super fun. So I always ask every guest what your first ever job was, like your first ever paid job, and then if you could just roll into your sort of business or career origin story right from back when you started to where you are now and the things that you do, and then we'll dig in a little bit after that.
Sure. So my first ever job, that's a good question. Does a self-created job count?
Oh, yeah.
So I grew up in Germany, and I was spent a lot of time between Switzerland and Germany. And so the first job, I remember I can recall a time where when I was younger, my grandma used to always get me these thick, like big page books for Christmas, birthdays, trying to get me all, educated, into reading books, but I wasn't that interested in it. And my brother and I, we used to take all that stuff, like the books, the clothes with the high collars that our grandma used to give us, and we took them to the flea market, just a local flea market. And for like a half a Saturday, early in the morning till the afternoon, we're selling those books, selling those shirts. And it was quite a cool experience. It was really fun, actually. That was probably the first time I learned how to make money or exchange goods for money.
So then what was your first like career-based job where you're like, okay, I'm an adult now. I've got an adult job and this is me.
I'm still not an adult, actually.
Neither am I.
Still not there. So once we moved to New Zealand, I was 16, and the first one, so this is still while I was at high school, but it was stacking shelves in the supermarket. And in the Coromandel in Thames, actually. That's the first place we moved to, the metropole of the Coromandel. And I was working in Pack and Save there.
Cool. So where are you at? So what sort of things do you do now? And let's have a bit of a chat about your current business and what you do.
Sure. So my journey, and I guess this sort of goes back into the question that you had earlier, like the first professional job. My career job, the first one, was in sales. And so I started in the ICT and telecommunication sector. And my job was to generate revenue for companies. And so it was going out hunting for other businesses that we could acquire as customers. And during that time, I became really good at making other people money. And sort of through that process, I sort of started reflecting, and I'm like, hey, hold on, if I can help other people make money, why don't I do that for my own business? And that's when I first got into entrepreneurship, and I started a couple of companies with friends. And I guess essentially this is sort of what I do now, is build companies, helping people grow companies. Like during my time as an entrepreneur, I got heavily involved with business accelerators here in New Zealand. I came on board as one of the program directors, designing accelerator programs. So this is like 3 to 6 month programs where companies would come in and they learn how they can acquire their first few customers, like get from 1 to 10 customers, 10 to 100 customers. And during that time, what I learned was that like we, as Kiwis, we create some amazing products, like awesome products. But unfortunately, we're not so good at actually taking these products to market, because like we learn software coding, we learn a trade, we learn a service, but we don't learn how to sell these. And that's what led me to start my company now, where we help people with customer acquisition, finding business, making money.
It sort of sounds like you are, as I've heard a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk say, a purebred entrepreneur. Your first ever job was flipping stuff at a flea market, and you realize that career life's in sales is not really for you, and then now you're doing it for yourself. So congratulations on that. It is a great trait to have, and hard as well.
Thank you. I was quite fortunate actually finding that path by accident. It makes sense in hindsight, but it didn't make sense at the time. And I was very fortunate to learn quite quickly that I loved working with people, but in my rules, or with my rules.
So another question I ask all of the guests as well is what their favorite brand is and why that brand is your favorite.
So I love brands like Apple because they've created like a cult following. I love Nike because they have got an amazing origin story. If you haven't read the book Shoe Dog, highly recommend the book. But if I think about a brand that I really love, it's actually a personal brand of a business coach in Australia called Taki. And like he goes on stage and speaks. He's got a long t-shirt on. He's barefoot. He's super casual. He's just really his authentic self. And everything that he touches, everything that he puts out is him as a brand, is so authentic and congruent between who he is and his market and who he helps. And I'm like that's an awesome brand. And I always look at that, and that's what I want to have in my business.
You're the second person to, when I ask that question, to say that actually I'm not going to focus on a brand, I'm going to focus on a person, because it's and they describe someone similar to what you said, that their authentic self all the way through. And it's inspiring to see someone who hasn't changed, but is doing such great things in the world and in New Zealand or wherever they're based. So today we're going to be focusing our conversation on generating revenue for startup business. So when I say startup, anyway, I mean any sort of business, whether you're a plumber, you're an electrician, you're a cafe, you own an events company, AV company, whatever that might be. And we're going to focus a bit of our time on bootstrapping. So I thought, for the purposes of this podcast, bootstrapping gets talked a lot, especially if you listen to sort of tech podcasts. What is bootstrapping?
Good question. And if you have a look at the definition of bootstrapping, I think it's something like, where the terminology came from was holding yourself up at the straps of your boot, right? So it's, rather than getting external help, it's like you're doing it yourself. And bootstrapping a company is all about growing a company without $1 million worth of budget, creating these amazing products, and then spending tons of marketing money and on agencies and marketing and beautiful brands. It's really about, through a lean process, like being lean in your methodology and slowly growing, it's not slowly, but sustainably growing your business, making money and limiting your costs as much as possible to sustain that growth and continue growing. That's my definition.
So if, as an example, if I've got an idea and I've got a current career job, and then I've got a side hustle or a side job, where ultimately the end goal would be for me to leave the current job that I'm in and go all in on the side hustle.
Yeah.
But you're starting to slowly build momentum. Would that be a form of bootstrapping, where instead of going to the bank or going to a fintech or going to try and get a co-founder or a partner or something like that, would just be slowly building up reputation, building up some value, building up some revenue, and then you can say, look, it's safe now to jump out of this safety net and then jump into that? Is that a form of bootstrapping?
Definitely. Yeah. And just to touch on that side hustle piece, when I see people successfully growing a side hustle, they have a full-time job and they keep that side hustle and work at it to make some money first, and really make sure they build it up on the side, as well as generating income from the normal day-to-day job. And once that then grows to a certain amount, you can free up some time, quit your job, or even better, slowly start reducing the amount of days that you work in your job, and then purely focus on your side hustle, which now becomes your main hustle. And
so disclaimer, that is exactly what I did. So I got to a point in my career job, which was when I said, hey, look, CEO, this is my scenario. I've got this bit, and it started to take up a hell of a lot of time. I've got my kids, my family, and my focus has changed a little bit. Can I reduce my hours down to 6 or whatever? I went down to 3 days a week.
Awesome.
And it was yes. And okay, cool. That means I can spend 2 days a week on my side hustle. I've still got the safety net here. And then I gave them a 18-month sort of plan of in 18 months I'm out. Okay, this is my plan out. So I was pretty honest and upfront, or if that comes early. So that was exactly how I did it. Awesome. What are some other options, if it wasn't for bootstrapping, some other options where you're not going to be, I suppose, tied down too much to a big bank loan? Or
I'm not a financial advisor, just to say that, but I've raised capital in my own businesses. I've bootstrapped my own companies, and I've helped other people raise capital. And like the key options that I usually see is, one, you have, like, the first one is friends, family, and any fool that would lend you some cash to start your business. Like, those are the 3 F's, right? But you also have cash loans. And in the beginning stages, you might, put a loan out against your car, or I've seen people remortgage their house and so on, or as collateral towards getting a bank loan. It's a bit hard to get a bank loan sometimes, unless you buy assets or have a really solid business plan. You can also raise capital from investors. And this is something that we've always done in the tech space, where you get some seed investment, which means, you might get 50 grand or 100 grand, maybe 500 grand of investment to help you create a product, get sort of that product market fit. So you've identified a need in the market, you have got an idea or a concept, you've got small proof that it will work. You raise some capital, small amounts, to then help you flesh that out and build a bit of a business around it. And then you might raise more capital on the back of that. And then I think my most favorite one is still bootstrapping. And it's not the easiest. They all have pros and cons to each one. But bootstrapping is then about building a sustainable business and going after revenue, rather than building one of these highly inflated, zero revenue, fast growth companies that doesn't actually generate any money.
So for the option, I think it was option B, which was going to an investor to try and get some capital to help fast forward the business, I suppose, or kick it off with a bit of financial support. How do you go about doing that, and where do you find these people that have got some money to invest in your business?
Good question. And I think, like, before you do that, entrepreneurs should be very clear as to why they need cash. Like, what's the reason they need cash? And like, I've made this mistake myself, where it was just everyone else was raising capital, so we figured we needed to raise some capital. But be very clear what kind of business you want to build. Is it going to be a business for your lifestyle? Like, you want to have like a job that provides for you, you can spend more time with family, you can have a great lifestyle? Or is it something that you want to build, take global, and build like $100 million company? Because they take very different approaches. And when you look for investors, you have a lot of angel investor networks. They're throughout New Zealand. You can find them overseas. These are professional angel investors. They're usually corporates, people that made money or inherited money. They're part of these networks where you can come in and you do a pitch. Like, you present your idea, you present your business model, you present your market and the growth opportunity. And on the back of that, you might find some champions within that angel group who then help you to raise capital. And sometimes you need to go through all the angel investment groups to raise enough capital. It might just not be from one. It could be from 5, 6, or 7 different angels, depending on how much you need to raise. But generally speaking, you have one angel group and then more investors on the back of that when you look to raise like a significant chunk of cash, which might be $1.5 million or your 2 million, 3 million, and so on.
So what's the trade-off when you start asking these angel investors for money? Are you giving away equity in the business? So you're giving away like 5%, 10%, 20%, or whatever that might be?
Yeah, definitely. You give away equity. And the less proven your business is, the less you can demonstrate that your business works. And for every $10 I put in, I get out $100, like sort of that type of mathematics. Mm-hmm. The less you have of that means the more uncertainty there is of whether you can actually repay that money. And the higher that uncertainty, the more risk there is in your business. And the more risk, the more equity you need to give away. That's sort of general rule of thumb. With angel investors, it used to be that they try to squeeze like a huge equity stake out of companies. Now, when that happens, entrepreneurs quite quickly, like the enthusiasm for running a company that they don't own significantly drops. And no one wants to run a company that they don't own. They don't make much money in the beginning, and it's tough, right? And so now angel investors understand that it needs to be a fair deal between what the entrepreneur owns in the company and how much stake they take for how much money they put in based on the valuation of the company.
So are there any resources, or are there any ways that, let's say if I'm a business and I'm looking for angel investment, but I need to get pre-prepared for that, and I know what they are, I can Google them and find out what angel investors are and what they require, but what sort of documentation and things do we need to go? Well, the way that my brain works is I'm figuring it's going to be something like a Shark Tank, where you walk in these big doors and there's these people sitting there standing up and you've got to prove to them that your idea is a good idea for them to invest in. So is there a standard way of doing it, or is there you just roll up and just do it whichever way you want?
It's pretty much like Shark Tank. No, I think it's very easy to get carried away with like writing extensive business plans. I think business plan is very important. It's got its place, but to get investment from investors, it's not about a business plan. Like a business plan is part of it, but also how much you can actually connect with the investors. Like, do they actually trust you to build what you say you're going to build? And so if you're looking for investment, it's not as simple as do your pitch and they throw lots of cash at you at the end of the pitch and going, yes, and everyone high fives and drinks champagne. Like Shark Tank stuff. Mark Cuban rolls out a cigar or something.
Yeah.
It can take time, and it can take 3 months, it can take 6 months. So if you need cash by March next year, you should have started 2 months ago to look for cash. Like it takes time, because you need to build trust and you need to connect with the investors, because obviously it's a partnership as well.
Cool. So I suppose you got to go and having a clear understanding of what you need the money for, how much you're willing to trade off for that money as well, and then ensuring that the people, you sort of know that you can read the room a little bit, so you know that Mark Cuban's going to be there and he's going to be the dude who's going to help you on the e-commerce space, and there's some other person there who's going to help you in the distribution space, and you need to be able to choose which person is best going to suit your business and your lack of skill set, I suppose, in that space. Cool. So could you give us some examples of businesses and reasonably successful businesses that have grown from the bootstrapping process?
Yeah. There are actually quite a few companies, like international, global companies, that bootstrap their growth. Actually, before I mentioned the brand Nike, right? Nike, they started off with their own money. Like the Stephen Knight, the founder, he borrowed money from family and he put his own money into it, into building a brand. And they actually started off as an importing company and distributor for another brand. And they were forced to shift when their suppliers didn't want to supply them any shoes anymore. But that's a different story. So Nike is a very good example. But here in New Zealand, a very successful company is Snapcons. software company that started off like as a software product, but they was self-funded. They funded their own growth. They put their money towards it and slowly built out the company. And there's actually a book that the founder wrote, and it's called, I think it's Bootstrapping is actually the title of the book. If anyone's interested in their journey. But there are lots of examples. Atlassian is another example. Facebook started off bootstrapping as well. And it took some time until they actually raised capital or had the right investors on board.
So what are some of the pros and cons of bootstrapping and raising capital?
Lots. So bootstrapping is not easy, right? Like you are running lean, you don't have much money to spend. And in the beginning, like for anyone starting off a business, in the beginning, you wear the hat of marketing. You are the salesperson. You are the customer service person. You are the product manager, or like you manage what you create. If you have got an e-commerce business, like you're the warehouse and logistics person, you wear all these different hats.
You're the CFO, HR.
CFO, HR, everything. Yeah. Like there's no time and you don't have enough money to necessarily bring in other people. So everything is super lean. And you and I were talking before, right? Like in the beginning, you need to do your own logo. You need to create your own marketing material. You need to write your own copy. You need to do all of that stuff yourself. And so that's bootstrapping. And there's an investor in the States who says that bootstrapping takes roughly 4 years longer than a company that raised some capital. But the learnings you take away are that you've got a business that's profitable, like it actually runs and turns money, it turns revenue, and you build a company. Yeah, and you build a company that actually matches how you want to build it. Versus capital raising, where like some companies, right, they raise $1 million, but they have 0 customers. And then they spend a lot of money on refining the product and playing around, making it better, and still figuring out how to actually acquire customers. And sometimes they raise a lot of money, but then they rapidly, like with money come expectations on how fast you grow, on how many customers you have, how much revenue you generate. Because if you can't deliver on the outcomes, then you might not get a follow-on round to sustain the growth, because usually you build the infrastructure first and then get the customers. Whereas with bootstrapping, oftentimes you get the customers and then build the infrastructure. So it's the other way around. And if you've got a capital intensive company, you need to raise capital. Like sometimes it just costs like $500,000 just in research and development, or you need to have stock on hand, or you need to build a factory or get a warehouse. But if you don't need that stuff, and oftentimes you don't, then you can do bootstrapping and you can self-fund.
So it sort of sounds like that capital, like raising funds, like getting a bank loan or angel investor, you're going to move a bit faster. Doesn't mean that you're going to be moving faster towards being successful, let's say. So bootstrapping could potentially be a safer option. Might take a little bit longer, more like a marathon. But then you're going to have a clear idea of every single element of your business, and you're going to be able to create something more sustainable. Do you think that's about correct?
Yeah, bang on. Yeah, that's a good summary. Yeah.
So what sort of businesses would you suggest could bootstrap compared to those that need capital? So I'm thinking like small businesses in New Zealand, like when you say bootstrapping or startups, in my mind anyway, I instantly start to think of tech startups and tech-based businesses, but there's a lot more to businesses and entrepreneurship than just tech-based businesses, where there could be a florist, there could be a tennis coach, there could be I don't know, there could be whatever. Yeah. So do you think that there are, for different industries, there's different types of capital needed at the beginning?
Definitely, 100%. And, if you go to traditional businesses and you might be a tennis coach, or maybe you are a consultant, like an IT consultant, or you're a mechanic. you could start off by being a mobile mechanic versus a mechanic who has their own workshop with lifts and like a 60 set of tools, like all the tools you can possibly think of. You can be a mobile van mechanic. For a tennis coach, you don't need a fancy website. What you do need is customers, and you can find them at local networking events. You can find them at community events. You can have a Facebook group. You can collaborate with other sports coaches. And so there are lots of different ways where you don't need capital, where bootstrapping is really good. But yeah, it's very different when it's capital intensive. Does it answer your question?
It does answer the question, yeah. So the question was really to see whether or not there's a difference from like startups are tech based, which in my mind, but anyone can be a startup. I'm a startup business myself. I started up a business that is focused on more on events, whether that's conferences, festivals, action sports events, and I need capital to help ensure that those events are run at the level that I want them to be run at. So I suppose, is there any advice that you'd give to a business right now who is, or maybe they're not even a business yet, and they're just something that's up here, and they've always wanted to do this thing, but they just didn't know how to do it, and maybe bootstrapping is the way that they want to do it. Can you give some advice and maybe a bit of a sort of a process of what they could go through until they jump out of their full-time job and then go all in on their whatever the business is?
Yeah, sure. And so with bootstrapping, there are essentially three distinct layers. So the first one is it's self-funded. So you might get some cash from some mates, maybe. Obviously, you can get a loan against your car, or family might loan you $1,000 or $5,000, maybe more if you're lucky. And so you can start off with that. It's self-funded. And what that allows you to do is clear your headspace to just really figure out and play around, test a little bit of how you can acquire your customers. And it's not about acquiring 1,000 customers. Like, figure out how to get the first customer. And once you figure out how to get that first customer, then have a think about, okay, we know people want to pay for stuff. That's good. It sort of gives you a bit of confidence. Mm-hmm. And once you've got that one, you don't need to look at the next 1,000. Just look at the next 10. How are you going to get the next 10 customers? In events business, sell your first ticket. And when you sell your first ticket, sell 10 more. And once you got 10, then look at selling 100, right?
It's exactly what it is. As soon as I see that one ticket sell, I'm like, yes.
It wasn't just a crazy idea.
It wasn't just stupid. Yeah.
And so like that 1, 10, 100, 1,000, like that's the strategy that we use all the time in my businesses and with clients. And then revenue starts to come in. And then you just need to make sure that you optimize the operational costs, like how much it actually takes to run the business versus how much money comes in. But that funds then the next stage of growth. And you get to a certain level where then you go, okay, we're not growing fast enough. We now need to put fuel on it. And that's where you can look at bank loans or go to an investment house or an investment bank to get some capital. Sort of those are essentially the stages. And to map out the process, like over the last 18 months, we've achieved some amazing results with clients. Like they're now doing $2 million in a month in sales, some of them.
Wow.
And the three core pillars that we find work wonders when you bootstrap. And so people usually have them the wrong way around. The first thing that any entrepreneur needs to take care of is their positioning in the market. And that is like, be really clear on what the vision is and what you want to build. And once you have that in mind, then be really clear on what category you want to play in. Like, how do you want to be perceived in the market? And being the cheapest in the market is like a bad game because you're not going to stick around for long. You're working a lot without much money in return. So it's not about being the cheapest, it's about being different. So how do you want people to view your business? And then to add to that is how do you communicate that to people? What messages do you use? What keywords do you want to be resonating with your brand. That's sort of the first pillar, and sort that out first. And once you have that, you can then jump into the second piece, which is all around creating a process of how you attract people. Like, how do people become aware of your brand? And then secondly, how do you engage people then? How do you make sure they keep coming back? Or how do you make sure that if they don't buy today, at least they stay in touch with you to maybe buy later on? And also, how do you then turn them into paying customers? And process is so important, but people forget about it. And there's a study by Harvard Business Review that looked at companies that had a really clear sales process versus companies that didn't. And the ones that did outperformed the other companies by 28%. Like, process is so key, and making sure that you know what that process looks like. So you've got great positioning in the market. You've got a really good process for attracting, engaging, and converting customers. And then the last piece is actually putting fuel on the fire with more promotion. And that is, you now look at, how do we ramp up our marketing? How do we run more events? How do we create better content and all that stuff? And the mistake that people do is they do it the wrong way around. They focus on promotion, and it takes them an additional year to actually figure out that they need to position themselves differently.
That's some epic advice. Our last question for the podcast today, and it's one that I ask all of our guests very last. If you could provide one solid piece of advice that you think would help a business right now, what would that piece of advice be? Sell
first, then create. I think that's the biggest lesson. I had a conversation yesterday with one of our clients that almost hit $2 million this month. It didn't quite, but they always focused heavily on selling and marketing. Just get commitment from clients. Like, a lot of entrepreneurs now, they've stopped selling and they're focusing on their product. Don't focus too much on the product, or don't focus too much on your website right now. That comes later. Focus on booking meetings now. And if they're not talking to you now, book them in for January, and just really focus on sales. And the reason I say that is because I've spent 7 years in accelerators and incubators, worked on about 400 projects with go-to-market strategies, and an amazing product still doesn't lead to success. Like, I've seen inferior products, like worse products, win because they focused heavily on sales and marketing and getting customers. So that would be my first point of advice. Don't stop selling.
Don't stop selling. Awesome. That's some amazing advice. Hey, Flavio, where could our audience find you? What is your website?
Sure. We've got FlavioHangatar.com. So it's my first name, last name.com. You can find us there. Yeah, that's probably the best place. We have a ton of free training, a lot of online training videos, unpacking a lot more around bootstrapping, creating revenue in businesses. So yeah, look forward to seeing you there.
Cool. So guys, we'll make sure that we've got Flavio Hangatar's website links down below. So if you do need to if you want to learn a little bit more about bootstrapping, you can just click on those links there. But Flavio, thank you so much for your time. This has been another solid podcast. It's really awesome, and we'll definitely be doing another one in the very near future. But until then, you have a great Christmas and an awesome summer holiday in New Zealand, and I'll catch you later on.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Craig. It's been amazing to be here, and yeah, thanks for having me. It's been
no problem, man. Anytime.